Good morning. My name is James Moser. It's my privilege to be your worship associate today. And I welcome you to First Unitarian Church, whether you're here in the room or joining us online. We are a welcoming congregation. You've heard that before. Probably other places too. But we mean it here. Our UU values describe and direct our welcome, no matter your station in life, your ethnic or gender identity, where you are on your pilgrimage of faith, or whom you love. You are welcome here, no matter how you got here. We have a few announcements this morning before we get rolling. First, there is a live stream at First Unitarian Table in the parish hall with books on sale and brochures about our winter program. Secondly, Soul Matters Conversations, a drop-in group, will meet on our monthly theme of love with Reverend Larry, and this starts in the Warren Room, just off the parish hall, at 12 noon. Visitors and newcomers are welcome. And thirdly, our Human Rights Task Force will be meeting in room 25 from 12 to 1:30 this morning. Just in case you have had an episode of casual faith, that will probably end today. Reverend Larry's theme is, "This is no time for casual faith," and prepare to have your hearts piqued and your minds challenged. Now let us prepare our minds and hearts for worship.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, James. And thank you for being here. So glad you could brave the cold and warm this sanctuary with your presence. Our opening words and call to worship are by J. Abernathy. Accepting, we affirm that love is our greatest purpose. Accepting one another is the truest form of faithful living. The search for truth is our constant star. We pledge our hearts and our minds and our hands to challenge injustice with courage, to find hope in times of fear, and to live out our Unitarian Universalist values every day as a beloved community. Thus, do we covenant with one another and with all that is sacred in life.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you at this time to join us in lighting it while I read these words. We meet on holy ground, for that place is holy where we meet each other, where lives touch, where love moves, where hope stirs. How strong is our need for one another, our silent beckoning to our neighbors, our invitations to share life and death together, our welcome into the lives of those we meet, and their welcome into our own. We kindle our chalice, a bowl of light, reflecting that eternal light which shines always around and before us. Now, as you are able in body or spirit, please rise and join in the singing of number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Please join with me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Join me now in a time of prayerful meditation This morning I've chosen a reflection from Reverend Arthur Foote, who was a minister for 25 years at Unity Unitarian Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. We should send them a lot of warmth right now, don't you think? This piece that I've selected is entitled Into the Silence. It begins with a quote by Thomas Brown. Be able to be alone. Lose not the advantage of solitude, but delight to be alone and single with omnipresency. This was written in 1605. Omnipresency. Let's say that word. Omnipresency. I bet it was in use at that time. Life is a pure flame, and we live by an invisible sun within us. And so Foote invites us into this meditation. Most of us dread going into the silence. We have lost the ability profitably to be alone, lost it through disuse, like the burrowing mole who has become blind. If we retire to be alone, it is no delight. Our minds do a hop, a skip, and jump. We find ourselves unable to concentrate. The bed's unmade, the letters unwritten, set up a clamoring demand, and we experience none of the tranquility we have come apart to enjoy. But this is only to say that the discipline of solitude is difficult, and our own disorganized condition pitiful. The only remedy is to learn this art anew. One can only learn to swim by swimming. One can only learn the advantage of solitude by faithful practice. And like swimmers, we must learn to not thrash about, but entrust ourselves to the buoyancy of the silence. For silence has a real buoyancy and the power to collect our thoughts by withdrawal from the outward to the inward is the way to discover that life indeed is a pure flame and that there is an invisible sun within us by which we truly live. So let us join now in a time of shared silence. We do not come casually into this circle to join one another in worship. We come with deep intentions and longings in our hearts and on our spirits. We come to be with one another. We come to be with a holy presence that is created by our coming together. We come to hear the deepest concerns in our own heart, for ourselves, for those we love, for one another, and for our world. So let's take a moment now and listen to those concerns that we might be holding in our own heart this morning. And you can speak them in the room if you would like now, or write them in the chat. Go ahead. Sometimes when we gather, we also bring with us joys that lighten our spirit so much that we want to share them with one another. I'm wondering what joys you might be experiencing and would want to share with this community, either in this room aloud or on the chat. Being here, yes. Yes. And I'm feeling so glad to see Darlene and Ed back from their time away from us. Yeah. So for the concerns and for the joys that we hold for ourselves, let's also recognize that we hold them in the loving concern and support of this community. Let us join now in a time of song. We'll join in the refrain of this song, the words of which will appear on the screen during this meditation.
Love is all
At this time, I invite you to share in a responsive reading. Your lines will be projected, and Reverend Larry will lead you in your response. This responsive reading is entitled Stand by This Faith by the Reverend Olympia Brown. Stand by this faith, work for it, sacrifice for it.
There is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you the loftiest ideals.
Which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful to you.
Do not demand immediate results, but rejoice that you are worthy to be entrusted with this great message.
That you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost.
Go on finding ever new applications of these truths and new enjoyments in their contemplation. Well, speaking about welcome back, Martin, for your, it's glad to have you in our service today. So there's a colleague of mine, the Reverend Daniel Cantor, who tells the story of when his child had a cousin who was Roman Catholic visiting them at their home, and the cousin asked his Uncle Daniel, "What is this church that you serve?" And Reverend Daniel replied, "We are a church that believes that Jesus was a man, God is mystery, and salvation is acting on our principles." His own child immediately reacted, "What? I thought we could believe whatever we wanted." It doesn't surprise me that Daniel's son had this mistaken notion about Unitarian Universalism. We tend to emphasize our religious freedom so much that we give the impression that we are just free to believe whatever we want to. Some of us who were raised with a stricter or more dogmatic religion feel so free of these encumbrances from the past that we tend to emphasize all the things we no longer believe rather than articulate what we do believe, right? My friends, we do cherish our religious freedom so much that we may tend to forget that freedom is our method and not our only message. Indeed, we aim to provide a wide circle in which freedom allows us individually and as a congregation to develop a religion that has integrity for us. We tend to put aside some of the coercion that's often associated with religion in order to arrive at the place where we can be authentic about our own beliefs. We aim to create a wide circle of perspectives and personal experiences so that we can truly dialogue with one another. And for the most part, we endeavor to be enriched by that dialogue, and we endeavor to be enhanced by multiple understandings, and we are open to being transformed by those interactions. I was so touched last week by the 20 people of our congregation who crowded into the Warner Room last Sunday after the service, which was focused on fearlessly curious conversations. We explored further some of the practices outlined in Monica Guzman's book, I never thought of it that way. Some in that group have committed to ongoing conversations with one another on how to build bridges in our conversations with one another, especially within a culture where so much division and polarization exist. Listening to one another, building bridges across experiences, that to me is one clear way of engaging in the practice of Unitarian Universalism, of embodying our principle, embodying the principles that guide us. To approach differences with understanding and engagement is challenging. It takes faith. Curiosity for me is a spiritual posture within my own Unitarian Universalist journey. It was curiosity that led me as a 17-year-old to ride my bicycle to my first UU church. I so resonate with Albert Einstein's guidance. One cannot help but be in awe when one contemplates the mysteries of eternity. Never lose a holy curiosity. For me, it is that holy curiosity that should be as tangible in our gatherings as the warmth of a sanctuary on a cold, bitter day. It is that presence of holy curiosity that should be as visible to us as the flickering flame in our chalice. Of course, I realize that we occasionally lose that holy curiosity. We become hardened and rigid, enamored with our own opinions, and yet we dare to enter the warmth of this sanctuary or gather in our homes to be in worship with one another. We dare to gather during the week in small groups in conversation with others in the congregation to listen to one another, to engage with our various perspectives and experiences. And we dare to light this chalice again and again to remind us that there is much more and that we are much more. There is more light, more truth, more compassion wanting to break forth if we can but cultivate the holy curiosity that humbles us and that hones us over time. At First Unitarian Church in Wilmington, you may end up sitting next to people who might identify themselves as Christians or Jews or pagans, atheists, agnostics, and seekers of every variety, and oftentimes some combination of any of these or even none of these. This does not mean that we are rootless and fickle. This does not mean we are carefree and careless. We allow God wrestling to occur, including wrestling with the idea that there is no God, or with many ideas, ways of understanding God. We may have different views of Jesus, yet the radical message of Jesus of hospitality, justice, and compassion for the least of these is where we seek to aim much of our activity. We have often emphasized the sentiment expressed in that statement, we need not think alike to love alike. We like to say we emphasize deeds, not creeds. So our emphasis as Unitarian Universalists has tended to be on what we do with our beliefs, how we live them out. But this does not mean that as Unitarian Universalists, you can believe whatever you want. This is often the misrepresentation of who we are that we lazily arrive at or that we seem to casually convey to others. Such a misrepresentation is a discounting of our history and of our heritage. Many of our forebears were persecuted or even killed because they dared to take a stand different from the beliefs that the dominant religious thought of their time held. They were called heretics not because they were flamboyantly skipping around town telling people that you can believe whatever you want. No. They had views and stands that they were taking, views of God, Jesus, heaven, hell, the church, human nature, that form the religious roots of what we have inherited as Unitarian Universalists in our own day. We also have some commitments that define us now. We tend to orient ourselves toward an understanding of the divine that is fundamentally rooted in love and not punishment. We are more inspired about the religion of Jesus rather than the religions that have been constructed about him. We see truth coming to us from many sources of the world's religions, sources of science and literature. We devote ourselves to filtering all of this through and formulate all of this through our own reflected upon lived experiences. So rather than sitting around eating bonbons or sharing bon mot clever expressions with one another when we come to a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we hold up a high standard for our religion, for our reason for getting together. We declare in one of our principles, and we endeavor to practice a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Now, we sometimes put the strong accent on the word free, and we forget to emphasize that responsible search. If we give out the vibe that you can believe whatever you want, we know that isn't true. The renowned Unitarian religious educator, Sophia Lyon-Fahs, stated it most clearly when she pointed out that it matters what we believe. She draws some significant distinctions that I think still resonate with our time. She writes, "Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged. Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's and our days and fears with unknown calamities. Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children and us with the warmth of happiness. Some beliefs are divisive, separating saved from unsaved, friends from enemies. Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas of exploration." You see, it does matter what we believe because it impacts our ways of being in the world, our ways of relating to our own experiences, our ways of relating to the fullness of life, to God, or to life's mystery and wonder. So I want to explain something to our newcomers about what they may have experienced. Sometimes when you've asked a Unitarian Universalist or asked us, "What do you believe?" we sometimes seem to freeze or mumble. When you ask a Unitarian Universalist, what do they believe, do they tend to tell you all the things that they no longer believe? When you ask a member, "What does this church believe?" do their eyes dart around the room and they look for a brochure or a pamphlet, something to give you rather than tell you? Unitarian Universalists, who are typically very talkative, just take my word for that, can sometimes become speechless in these moments. It's true. I've observed it. Have you? So newcomers in the room or online, let me give you some insight into the mating rituals of the Unitarian Universalist species. When asked, who are Unitarian Universalists? The fact of the matter is that we have so much to say, but we sometimes don't know where to start. Or we're sometimes self-conscious about coming across too determined or too certain. The fact of the matter is that some of us carry wounds from our previous religious traditions that we can't help but draw a contrast between our religious past and what we currently think or feel. The fact of the matter is that some of us are of a particular generation when most people had a religious upbringing, so we just assume that you, as a newcomer, may have had one too, and that you have some religious baggage that you want to dispense of as well. But that might not be true. In our politeness and wanting to convey to you our welcoming and our generous spirit, we sometimes forget to be curious about what you are actually wondering about, what you are actually seeking. We may feel like you don't want to talk about God, but you may want to do so. We may have put aside some of our beliefs about Jesus that we learned as a child in Sunday school, and you may have read many of the contemporary books about the historical Jesus and want to have that as your starting place in the discussion. We may not want to come across as too spiritual when it may very well be it is your spiritual search that brought you here. You may want to maintain some of your religious heritage rather than leave it behind. You may be wondering how Unitarian Universalism may help you approach your Buddhism, your Christianity, your Judaism, or your paganism in a multi-religious way. We welcome you, newcomers, because some of us realize that through these interactions with you, we may also update our Unitarian Universalist operating system from 1.0 to 2.0. Whenever we may have come across as pretty wishy-washy about our religion, in fact, many of us could actually tell you stories. Tell you stories about how finding this church or finding Unitarian Universalism changed our lives, transformed us, redeemed us from limiting understandings of ourselves, the sacred, or the world, right? If you could hear our stories, you may also hear that some of us were ostracized from our families because we go to a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Some of us may have felt betrayed by the trust that we put on our previous religion, so we're so sensitized and don't want to seem too persuasive when we talk to you about our Unitarian Universalist faith. Sometimes we want to tell you about all the famous people who were Unitarians or Universalists in order to communicate, see, we're normal. We're not as weird as you think we might be, and we might possibly be great as well. Newcomers, we don't really mean to play hard to get, even though we come across that way sometimes. So newcomers, well, for that matter, newcomers and longer-term members, when you encounter any of us going through any of these machinations and overcompensations, simply put on a knowing smile, pause, and then ask, can you tell me the story of your own journey toward and within Unitarian Universalism? Can you tell me how your Unitarian Universalism may have changed and evolved over time? Can you tell me what you really care about? Ask. Can you tell me what the difference being part of this congregation has meant to you in your own life? Some of the ways that we tend to approach communicating about our faith are well known in our culture. I know that because of all the different religious groups that I have traveled with and among in my work. The humorous Garrison Keillor probably captures our tendencies to be vague and inarticulate about what we really care about. He writes, "The Minnesota town of Lake Wobegon was founded by New England Unitarian missionaries who came to the region to convert the area's Native American population through interpretive dance." So newcomers and all of us, you might have noticed our tendency towards interpretive dance. Keillor likes to rib Unitarian Universalists as much as Unitarian Universalists like to joke about ourselves. We get what Keillor is getting to when he tells the story about a Unitarian monastery in New Hampshire. Keillor says, "The rule there is complete silence. But if you think of something really good, you can go ahead and say it." You get the joke? Unitarian Universalists never want to come across as too strict, too sure of ourselves, or too demanding. But the danger, my friends, is that it might seem that we don't take ourselves seriously enough in a time that might require us to do so. My colleague, Reverend Ellen Cooper Davis, gives this advice or guidance. She says, because we're non-creedal, the question, what do you believe, may not really be the right question for Unitarian Universalists. Instead, it might be questions of how and why. How do we encounter the holy? How should we live together? We funny, fragile, and beautiful humans. Why is it that we must bring more love and justice into this world? Whose are we? How am I called to serve? So I'm going to invite us to practice more how and why questions with one another in these coming weeks, to begin to understand what underlies and grounds each of us in our Unitarian Universalist faith journey. I agree with the current president of our Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, Reverend Susan Frederick-Grey, when she says, "This is no time for a casual faith. We are living in times of heartbreak, violence, and pain, and in this time, we need communities that remind us of our humanity." I agree. We must realize more now than ever, perhaps, our good intentions about not coming across as too serious or certain or committed could mean that we've become too casual about our faith in a time that really requires more of us. In a time when there's a rise of Christian nationalism and a push to have all of us in this country abide by laws that are based on a very narrow understanding of Scripture or Christianity, this is not a time for a casual faith. In a time when some school boards are banning books and restricting curricula in order to fit into this narrow perspective of the human being, this is not a time for a casual faith. At a time when some want to deny science and reason, want to imagine the climate crisis doesn't exist, or that they'll be raptured into heaven or damned into eternal fire, so it doesn't matter. We don't need to worry. This is not a time for casual faith. We need to engage across all of these differences and show up with what it is that we are committed to and the world we are committed to creating together. I'm inspired by the history of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. It just still boggles my mind that immediately following the period of the Civil War, when there was so much loss and grief, division in families and in the country, so many reasons not to hope or to be optimistic about the human condition or humanity, that still a group came together right after the Civil War to found this church. Our ancestors realized that it was not a time for a casual faith either, but a time to take themselves and the Unitarian faith that they were promoting seriously. It was a time when they decided to promote an optimism about the divine within the human and the progress that was still possible, even when the evidence for this optimism or this progress was not even evident. I believe that we've inherited from our first Unitarian ancestors this forthrightness about what difference we want to make in individuals and in this community. We can't be a casual faith. We must look boldly into the world in which we are actually in, and not the one that has gone by. This is what our ancestors, the founders of this church, did, and this is what we must do now. Can I get an amen? Good. We must be generating the future now. We must ask what we really care about and to do all that we can to generate actions that help us to align with what truly matters to us as a religious community. So next week, we will begin our annual time for asking this congregation to commit or recommit to our future. Our theme is generating our future now. Say those words after me, generating our future now. Meditate on those words over the next few weeks, because that's the activity that we want to gear ourselves up for and toward. This is a time when we'll ask each of us to do the best, to the best of our ability, to commit to building upon and sustaining what we value about in this congregation, now and for the future. If you've read the e-news, you've been informed that in recent years we've needed to borrow from our rainy day fund. That fund is limited. If we don't increase our pledge amount of this church year to $50,000 more, we will need to use that fund again and then deplete it for future years. This means that we have less to call upon in the future, when that fund could then get completely expended. We can't afford to not be transparent about our finances in this post-COVID time. We can't afford to be casual about our reality. We invite each other into a path of generosity. Let's be clear, as Mark Ewert writes, generosity can have many expressions, including care, including time, including skill, including intelligence, gifts, and including money. I believe that one cannot omit any of these, he writes, without curtailing them all. And of course, financial generosity is one of the most challenging expressions of our generosity, and perhaps holds the most opportunity for us to make a difference in the world and our own well-being. Then he reminds us of the root meaning of the word philanthropy, a word that we might dismiss, but then he recognizes that it includes all of us. He writes, the word philanthropy comes from the Greek philanthropia. Broken down into its parts, it translates into phil, loving, and anthropos, mankind, therefore loving or useful to humankind. He continues, in my use of the word, you do not need to be rich or have a big stash of money to give away in order to be a philanthropist. We just need to want to love humanity, to love the directions that we're moving into. So I'm just looking at this group of philanthropists who've just appeared before me, because I know you love this world, you love humanity, you care about what happens. I hope that as we engage in this annual reflection as a congregation on what commitments we want to make to this congregation, that we think about what difference we want to make through our own actions, through our own volunteer service, through our own finances, for our own caring for one another. I trust that we will not be casual in our reflection or in our commitment. I trust that we will not be casual in our reflection on what it is that we can do, what it is that we can give, or in our commitment. So may it be.
Growing up in a lower middle class working family, we did not have much to spare for church offerings. We attended every week and put something in the plate. But nonetheless, part of my religious training stressed the ideal of tithing, giving 10% to the church. I never made it. But I did learn that giving of time and talent was an important element of stewardship along with gifts of treasure. You know, the T triumvirate, time, talent, and treasure. Well, then there's tithe. Over my working career, with a family of 6, I could never afford the tithe of my treasure. It was just not realistic. Though our level of church giving did in fact amount to a meager sacrifice of things that the family could have done otherwise. But I've always found the investment of my time and abilities to be rewarding, to a point. Unfortunately, on 2 occasions, I burned out due to overcommitment, and I had to drop out for a period of time. I just overcommitted, doing too much. Had to back off for my mental health. Beware of that. So what I've learned, and I commend to you, is the principle of balance. The deepest rewards of participating in the life of First You, for me, are always inherently connected with the relationships with people that I have here. Being involved with worship associates and Emmanuel Dining Room and the Ministers Advisory Team are my current commitments, as well as other social engagements that enrich my life. Maintaining and building our faith community through participation is as important as dollars. Yes, we need the dollars to sustain, but sustain what? The core of our gifts lie in our relationships. Think of how much more we could accomplish together if each of us, as we are able, engaged in at least one service commitment in the life of our church each year. Now, many of you I know are well beyond that, and some of you may be approaching overcommitment. That needs to be considered as well as making commitment. For me, and I hope for you, the benefits always outweigh the burdens, and both are shared. Now, whether you're a member or a friend of First You, here's my challenge for you to think about during the coming stewardship season. Pledge a little more than you think you can. And find at least one task group, work team, or committee to participate in the actual work and relationships of the church. Now, you know there are 4 ways of giving, and they will be projected momentarily so that you can make those gifts of treasure that help sustain the infrastructure of who we are. At this time, I would invite you then to join me in dedicating our offerings, however we may make them, to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of
Thank you, Martin and Kathy. If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join us now in extinguishing it to these words. As we make ready to leave this holy space we have shared, we prepare ourselves for hope lived out amid the needs around us. We carry the light of the chalice within, reflecting the eternal light which shines always around and before us.
So, following our benediction, I encourage you to greet one another, connect with those who may be visiting us today. Join us for a time of fellowship in the parish hall. And following the benediction, we will also sing our closing hymn, 1028. The words will be on the screen, Fire of Commitment. So I close with this reminder from Maya Angelou. May her words bless and illuminate the path before us this week. One isn't necessarily born with courage, she writes, but one is born with potential. Without courage, we cannot practice any other virtues with consistency. We can't be kind or true, merciful, generous, or honest. And so I add, may we find the courage of commitment within our own hearts and our collective hearts as a congregation again and again. May you feel blessed, and may you be a blessing to this world. Let's join in singing 1028, Fire of Commitment.
Spirit into faith set free from fear. When the fire Amen.